So, in this program today, we'll break down how Beijing is becoming increasingly isolated, and we'll go country by country to examine how each is responding to Xi Jinping's call to unite against the US in this escalating trade war. We'll start with Asia and then turn to Russia and then Ukraine. So, from April 14th to 18th, Xi Jinping made a big show of visiting Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. His goal? Rally the neighbors, project strength, and give impression that China was leading a united front against the US. But here's what actually happened. Every country smiled politely, rolled out the red carpet, and avoided making any clear commitment to stand with China. On paper, they signed dozens of agreements, but most were light on substance. Take Vietnam, for example. Xi Jinping signed 45 agreements, but most of them involved China giving something, like paying for railway projects or exporting AI technology, while Vietnam gave almost nothing in return. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping didn't offer these countries greater access to Chinese markets, no major boost in imports from these countries. Trump, on the other hand, is offering access to the US market as long as there's tariff reciprocity. That's a trade deal these countries are more than happy to make, and they're not being shy about it. So on April 18th, just 3 days after Xi Jinping ended his Vietnam visit, Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh met with Jeffrey Perlman, chairman of the U.S. Asian Business Council, and said publicly that U.S. Vietnam relationship is special, unlike Vietnam's relationship with any other country. If that's not a message, I don't know what is. And that's not all. According to the military website 1945, Vietnam is planning to buy at least 24 F-16 fighter jets from the US. This will be the biggest arms deal between the two countries since the US lifted its arms embargo on Vietnam back in 2016. Now let's shift to Malaysia. On the surface, Malaysia was warm and respectful, but behind the scenes, a very different story was unfolding. Just yesterday, news broke that Malaysia Aviation Group, or MAG, is in talks with Boeing. And here's the kicker. If Chinese airlines cancel their orders for Boeing 737 MAX jets due to the US China trade war, Malaysia Airlines is ready to take them. And that's a lifeline for Boeing, and it totally undermines China's pressure or pressure tactics. It's also a not so subtle wink to the US. And those planes, they're in hot demand. Russia was actually the first to express interest in taking them, even offering to use frozen assets to pay. India is also in the race. With its aviation sector booming, Indian carriers are eager to get their hands on those aircraft too. Speaking of India, US Vice President J.D. Vance just wrapped up a visit to India and he brought his whole family. Well, you see, most countries are sending trade ministers to DC to negotiate. India got a vice presidential visit from the US. Trump's intention to lock in India as a key Indo Pacific partner is crystal clear. And right on cue, India announced a 12% temporary tariff on imported steel, effective for 200 days, to block cheap imports. We all know where that cheap steel is coming from: China. Even Cambodia, which many people see as a CCP satellite state, made a bold move the day after Xi Jinping left. Now, China had poured billions into renovating Cambodia's Ream naval base and even donated 2 frigates. They held a grand ceremony, opening ceremony on April 2nd. Then on April 19th, just one day after Xi Jinping left Cambodia, 2 Japanese warships docked at the very same base, and Cambodia held a formal welcome ceremony for them. This was the first time any non-Chinese military vessel had docked there. Remember, in the Indo-Pacific, the US Navy is enemy number one to China, and Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force will be enemy number two. So for Cambodia to welcome Japanese warships into a base built and paid for by China, that sends a loud, unmistakable message. Even Cambodia is now balancing interests, not blindly following Beijing. In short, it feels like a coordinated backlash is taking shape across Asia. And no one has expected the hardest punch to come from one of CCP's oldest friends, Singapore. Just yesterday, Singapore's former First Lady, Ho Ching, reposted an article that tore into Xi Jinping, and the headline alone was jaw dropping. The headline reads, if Xi Jinping hadn't spent the last 12 years behaving like a mob boss, China would have far more influence in the world today. Now, let's not forget, of all Southeast Asian countries, Singapore has been the most, in my opinion, the most pro Beijing. And there's more. Singapore has quietly become a key conduit for China's access to banned technology. Reports show that almost all of China's illegal semiconductors, or I think it was like 98% of the illegal semiconductor chips China received came through Singapore. As for Ms. Ho Ching, she is not just a symbolic figure as the former First Lady. She's a heavyweight in her own right. She was CEO of Temasek Holdings, the Singaporean government's investment arm. She was the CEO for 17 years, and she still chairs the Temasek Trust today. In addition, she serves as an honorary advisor to Tsinghua University, one of China's top institutions. So when someone like Ho Qing reposts a piece comparing Xi Jinping to Don Corleone, the figure in the movie Godfather, criticizing his aggression in the South China Sea, his hypocrisy in on protectionism, and branding Belt and Road as a debt trap, it's not a casual repost. Now let's take a look at South Korea, who is a longtime US ally. Just today, Korea's Customs Service announced they had discovered a surge in Chinese goods falsely labeled as Korean exports, all aimed at evading Trump's tariffs. In just first quarter of 2025, the Koreans uncovered almost $21 million worth of origin fraud goods, nearly matched all of 2024's total of 24 million. 90% of that was headed to the US. So, what does that tell us? Well, first, China is increasingly using South Korea as a backdoor to sneak its products into the US. Right? The fact that the amount that the South Koreans discovered in Q1, it was almost the equivalent of the total amount that they discovered in 2024. So China obviously is increasing its effort to use South Korea as a backdoor. Secondly, South Korea is cracking down hard. Even though these fake exports are a drop in the bucket compared to Korea's $130 billion in annual exports to the US, Seoul is taking it seriously. Why? Because they don't want to risk trade talks or jeopardize their relationship with Washington. All right, so let's step back to take a look at the bigger picture. We've got countries with different alignments. South Korea, a US ally, India, a neutral, non-aligned giant. And then you have Singapore, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam, all historically friendly to Beijing. Yet all of them are now keeping China at arm's length. It's not an official alliance yet, but this is the early shape of an economic coalition surrounding China. Call it a trade war pile on or a supply chain shift in motion. Either way, the momentum is real. And Beijing certainly feels it. Yesterday, China's Ministry of Commerce issued a statement warning that any country that signs trade deals with the United States at China's expense should expect, quote, firm and reciprocal countermeasures. Translation? Well, they're panicking. Even Xi Jinping's old friend, Vladimir Putin, is starting to make life difficult for him. Now let's talk about the Ukraine-Russia conflict, because here's the irony. Both Zelensky and Putin, despite being on opposite sides of a brutal war, share one thing in common. Neither is taking Xi Jinping seriously. That's from my perspective. Okay, starting with Zelensky. So for the past 3 years, he's tried to stay neutral in the U.S. China rivalry. even though he's always known that China was quietly aiding Russia's war machine. Zelensky clearly sees which way the wind is blowing. In just the last week, or maybe two, he's given multiple interviews exposing China's role in supporting Russia military, industrial complex. According to Zelensky, China has been shipping dual use technologies to Russia via third parties, all while maintaining a phony image as a neutral peace broker, right? So Zelensky has called out Beijing as war fueling double dealers. Of course, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman snapped back with its usual script: denials, deflection, and accusations. But then something unexpected happened. Russia's own state media, Sputnik News, totally blew Beijing's cover. In a glowing article, they praised China for supplying Russia with a range of electronic industrial goodies and went on to celebrate the strategic trust between the two countries. That must have hurt Xi Jinping. Even some Chinese netizens couldn't help but laugh at Xi Jinping for having such a double faced ally. But Putin knew exactly what he was doing. It's a textbook case of what the Chinese call praise so loud that it hurts, right? Using flattery to backhandedly expose China's duplicity. It's a classic Russian double play. Meanwhile, back in Southeast Asia, more and more countries are stepping up their efforts to crack down on China's widespread practice of origin laundering. Vietnam's Ministry of Industry and Trade recently issued a directive specifically targeting illegal transshipments of Chinese goods to the US and other trade partners. In Thailand, the Director General of the Foreign Trade Department stated that authorities recently uncovered 42 types of products fraudulently claiming Thai origin, with most of these violations involving aluminum films and electric bicycles destined for the US and Europe. Even Cambodia is getting ahead of the curve. Its government is now developing new procedures to prevent other countries from using Cambodia as a transit point for relabeled exports headed for the US. Malaysia has repeatedly urged Chinese companies not to use the country as a stopover in an attempt to sneak products into the US. So you see, from Ho Ching's bold defiance in Singapore to Zelensky's sharp condemnation, and even Putin's double playing or double dealing, the message is clear. Xi Jinping is losing the room. Southeast Asia is clamping down on China's trade tactics. Even traditional partners are pivoting toward Washington. So what started as a trade war is now evolving into a global realignment. And it's clear the world is no longer willing to play by CCP's rules.